Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, Jeremy, and thank you for coming to testify. I have took some time to look over your past testimonies and today's testimony, and I had several questions, so if you wouldn't mind bearing with me.
Sure.
Can you list the services you provide to the community?
Yeah, so I mean, the services that we provide at our organization would include pregnancy testing, would include ultrasounds, would also include parenting education classes, also would include material support for things like cribs and car seats, diapers, clothing, things of that nature. Other things that we would also be able to provide would be being a point person to get them connected to community resources. So for things like WIC, for pesky health insurance, getting connected with job placements and housing. And we're not just giving referrals, we're actually available to kind of really help our clients through that entire process. Other things that we're able to do is also offer adoption connections as well with the same kind of thing. We're not just giving a name. We're able to help them walk through the whole process because there are some different adoption plans that would be available to a client. So we would help them navigate that space. Of course, we also are providing referrals for prenatal care and getting them into a doctor. A lot of our experience has been with clients who experience an unexpected pregnancy. They're not quite sure what to make of it, and so they oftentimes put off some of the immediate prenatal care. So it's really important for us to be able to help them get connected and find a doctor and a place for them to stay healthy. Some of the other things that we provide too, are like relational mediations. So again, with parents or with a partner, we offer to step in and help navigate conversations and kind of advocate for our client with what it is that she would like us to help her to do. Other things too is we have, I think as we heard mentioned before from Hopeline, we have the same kind of support programs in place for women who have suffered loss and for the men as well who have suffered loss through miscarriage, through grief there. We've also started something new as well this year called Savanon, which is a sexual abuse and victims kind of anonymous group. It's a support group and a place for clients to come and kind of really share their story and find healing through what is some very traumatic events. So those are a list of many of the things that we do at our Women's Center in Eastern Connecticut.
Wow, thank you. Thank you for that information. Do you have licensed medical staff like doctors and nurses available?
We do. We have a medical doctor who's a director, and we also have registered nurses as staff and volunteers as well. And their medical licenses cover whatever medical services they provide. So, what we found out through this process is as we move to this committee, people don't really know anything about pregnancy centers. So, but the state law doesn't require a pregnancy center who provides the pregnancy testing and the ultrasounds to be a registered family clinic, although you can be, you're not required to be. And that's just because of the licensing of the medical staff. Their licenses cover all their medical practices, and that's a pretty common thing here in the state of Connecticut and beyond.
Okay, thank you. How will this legislation impact your organization?
Well, even though this legislation hasn't been passed yet, it's already negatively impacted us. Outside of the time and resources that we've had to go and put in to try and, talk about this and stop the state from really disparaging our work year after year. We're encountering people in some places at some of the schools and agencies that believe that all pregnancy centers are deceptive because of this legislation and the testimony given here. So this has really hurt some of our partnerships. Some of us have even documented cases of grant funding that's been removed from us or hasn't been made available to us because of this bill and this testimony given here. And, the legislation itself targets faith-based centers because it's our mission, because in our mission, we're not providing abortion. If you read SB 835, if we were to provide abortion, all this would go away. Nobody would be concerned if there was any deception going on. And that's very problematic. And I would say, in addition, that we've heard extensive testimony before this committee where it's kind of desired that our free speech be controlled. So people are saying like statements like "we can help" if you're pregnant, or "make an appointment with us" is being considered deceptive. And I mean, that is not deceptive at all. But these are the things that we're hearing, and just reading through some of the written testimony, and probably the testimony you're going to hear throughout today and into the evening, you're going to hear those same kinds of things. Also, the remedy for some of these proposed penalties that we see would allow the Attorney General to be that alone person to enforce everything. And that really could mean squashing and compelling our speech. One of the things we've heard a lot about over the last several years is about location, location, location. If a pregnancy center is located near a family reproductive health clinic, then that is deceptive. If they have a name that they don't agree with, that is also deceptive. And the remedy for that is to tell the pregnancy center that they need to move or rename themselves. And that is not something I see any Attorney General or anyone in the United States having that authority to do. And so I'm just really concerned about this targeting of pregnancy centers.
Thank you for that. And you brought up something that came to my mind. I read through the NARAL ProChoice Connecticut Foundation report that they put out. And I noticed there was some conflicting reports with regard to where they put the centers. In one spot, they were complaining that they were near other health centers. And then the other, in another part of the report, it was complaining that they were out in desolate areas where there was no medical providers available for the culture or the community that was there. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I can speak. So I think you're referring to the NARAL pregnancy report that they put out in 2015 and updated in 2018. And I believe they actually call that report "The Right to Lie." So again, a very disparaging title of their report going after these pregnancy centers. And in that report, they do very much target my organization a few times, as well as other pregnancy centers here in the state. And they do it in a very clever way. So, for instance, they'll take my mobile unit and they'll have these two statements, and they'll say that there's deceptive advertising and these people are terrible and not transparent. And then they throw the picture of our mobile unit in between those two comments. And so we kind of see that through the entire report. And that report is really littered with contradictions and with information that is not correct and not verifiable. One of the biggest things that have happened here, and I probably brought this up the first time I testified, is that nobody is talking with the pregnancy centers. So there's no conversation that's happening with the pregnancy centers. And it really seems to me, by my experience of seeing the information that's been shared through the committee and through those sharing testimony in favor of this bill, that they're all coming from one document, and it's that NARAL report. That information in that report is the information that they're referencing to be true. And it's really concerning because, again, that is not these pregnancy centers here in the state of Connecticut. And we're not part of that conversation of this legislation. So they're relying on an activist group who's really, honestly, they're allowed to do whatever they want. It's a free country, but their organization is designed to advocate for abortion. And Connecticut has very, very healthy and strong laws in place for a woman's right to choose and her reproductive health. And I get maybe there's not a lot for NARAL to do here in the state of Connecticut in order for that, but going after pregnancy centers is not okay.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I noted in that report is it said, according to the most recent national data available, nearly half of all the pregnancies in the United States are unintended. I found it interesting that you're being accused of deceptive advertising, and yet Planned Parenthood, the name in itself isn't saying it's addressing unplanned parenthood. It's actually suggesting that they're working with people who are planning parenthood. Do you have anything to say about that? I thought that was kind of an interesting.
Well, I mean, I know this might be your first year on the committee, but that's been raised here several times. And honestly, I think mistakenly it's been laughed off because I think it just really shows the double standard here that's being asked of the pregnancy centers. Specifically, if you take a look at the pregnancy center in the city of Hartford, that pregnancy center was located in very close to the Hartford GYN, which is also the same place that NARAL shared office space with. So there's clearly some relationships there that's really motivated this. But what we saw through that whole process was names like Hartford Women's Center was considered to be deceptive. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I don't believe the Hartford GYN has always been called Hartford GYN. I think their website is actually something to do with the Women's Center. So they changed their name because they wanted to target a certain group of people, and that's fine. But then to come back and tell pregnancy centers that we need to be on our heels about the names we choose or where we choose to set up is very problematic. And just to get back to your point about the location, when they were talking about rural locations, they were probably specifically talking about our mobile unit. And that's something that we've really experienced some real just terrible libel statements coming from NARAL about our mobile unit over the last couple of years. If you took a look at one of my testimonies from I don't know if it was HB 7070 or the year, see all these things run together. But I shared on my testimony from 2019 on HB 7070 some tweets that NARAL posted about our mobile care van. And now keep in mind, our mobile care van travels to the state, and we're providing pregnancy testing, ultrasounds, and community resource referrals for people who are really struggling. We're seeing people who have low incomes. We're seeing people who may be in some situations at home where they're scared. We're seeing people who may be in this country without the proper documentation. And so what we're doing is we're helping them get them connected to health and community resources that they need. And so NARAL in that tweet took a picture of our van and tweeted out that our van was sketchy and that there was stranger danger involved. And so here we have this activist group going after a pregnancy center's van, saying that, really implying that our van is sketchy and stranger danger, that women or men who would be involved in this van at all are going to be either molested or killed, because that's what that means, right? Stranger danger is what we tell our kids to stay away from that van giving candy. So this is the kind of just juvenile activity that's been going on the back end of this, and it's really concerning because, again, my experience has been that the committees relied heavily on the information that NARAL is providing, and that information is more than suspect. Some of it's very misleading, and some of it's just untrue.
Thank you for that. Do you have any concerns over the definitions provided in the Section 1 of SB 835?
Yeah, let me grab that bill. I have it in front of me here. Yeah, so I mean, just looking at this, I mean, the first appears a definition that's used in legislation has been borrowed from the NARAL definitions. That's in that very report. So that very report that we're talking about has these definitions in there. So you can clearly see that it's the same people that are involved in putting this together. So the first thing right off the bat is the first definition is given about abortion. So it's really a clear indication that this bill opposes pregnancy centers because of their faith-based beliefs about abortion. I mean, also, when we're defining abortion, I would probably also make a suggestion that maybe surgical abortion should be included and not undefined. Moving on to the second part where the clients go, I mean, we wouldn't count a person who calls or inquires a client. So, I wouldn't agree with that assessment. That's somebody who's calling or inquiring. A client is somebody that has walked through our doors and agreed to receive our services. I think the definition, we had the same problem with the city of Hartford's ordinance, and we have the same problem here with the state bill, is this idea of health information is way too vague. And what could constitute as health information could have anything to do with having a headache or, having a pimple. And it's so vague and so unspecified. Moving on, I think, to the next part here. Let me turn the page. I think it would be great for the committee if they could tell us who are these medical providers as defined by the state and federal law. This is something too that we've gone back and forth both here in the committee and with the city of Hartford, is their inability to say who they consider to be a medical provider. Is it doctors? Is it nurses? Is it midwives? Or is it an LPN? Is it CNA? I mean, there's all these things that aren't being defined. The city of Hartford just kept saying, well, whatever the state says. So we really need to know what the state's recognizing in a term like that. The prenatal care, I think, really needs to be fleshed out as a definition. And again, we had the same issue with the city of Hartford's ordinance. The committee kind of in the past hasn't really wanted to flesh that out. But I mean, we really need to come to an understanding of what prenatal care is. I think if we move to number 9, when we're talking about pregnancy services center, I mean, we see 2 different kind of names being used in this bill. So the bill is being called limited services pregnancy centers, but we're defining pregnancy services center. So, I mean, this has to do with the fact that things were just copied and pasted and people aren't really good at putting this together. But we're just seeing in the bill, there's just like 2 completely different terms being used. So we're defining a term that we're never using, and the term we're using isn't being defined. Again, I think when we're talking about prenatal care, I definitely think that prenatal care includes more than laboratory tests and pelvic exams. So, I mean, as far as section 1 goes, those are some of the notes that I had that I think are really lacking.
Thank you. Can you speak to section 2? Do you have any concerns with the regulations being set forth?
Well, I think again, so we're back to now using a pregnancy services center term is now being called limited service pregnancy center, right? We see that change in the wording right there. The committee, I mean, I don't know, they must have really rushed through this because we're seeing that I don't know. I'm just looking at this and I'm just seeing that as we're going through this. One of the biggest things that stick out is this idea that they're going to regulate the internet. I mean, I had this long. I sent this amended testimony a couple years back about this because they want to control the way that it was suggested the committee should control the way that Google search results come up. So I mean, I think that's very problematic. And then this idea of pregnancy centers being responsible for omitting information, that to me seems very vague. And, how would we know what the state would want us to say, especially when the attorney general would be the one deciding that. So that omission too, again, that was a very strong point that we raised in the city of Hartford's ordinance as well.
So when we're comparing the 2 different kind of services that are available with the pregnancy centers and perhaps Planned Parenthood, would you say that, can you tell us what perhaps the pregnancy center would offer that Planned Parenthood wouldn't?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm sure we offer some of the same services like pregnancy testing and ultrasounds. Perhaps maybe the reason for our ultrasounds might be different than their reasons for them. Also, we would also be part of the options counseling as well, the decision aid, if a client wanted to kind of process her situation and walk through some things with us. So those would be things that I know that we would have in common. But the difference there is all our services were provided free at no charge to our clients. There's no insurance, there's no sliding scale. These services are free because the cost has been provided for them by private donors. But some of the other things, and I listed them out early on that we do differently, would be the material support, like the cribs and the car seats. Some of the other things that would separate us would be some of our support and healing groups, whether it has to do with miscarriage loss or sexual abuse assault. Again, our constant contact with our clients, our willingness to kind of walk them through any type of paperwork or process, whether it's with WIC or job placement. One of our staff sat down with a client just a few days ago to help her work through her resume as she was trying to get ready to get back out into work now that her her baby was old enough. And so these are the kinds of things that we're doing that I know that Planned Parenthood's doing. And I would never be one to say Planned Parenthood needs to do this. And so I would also be one to not say a pregnancy center would need to do this as well.
So you're saying that you're being called a limited pregnancy center simply because you don't offer abortions. Is that a fair statement?
That's what it appears to me, that our services are limited because we don't provide abortions. Now, maybe somebody could make a case that we're limited because we don't provide other medical services, but we're not seeing those other medical services being provided in here. The medical services that are in the ordinance would include pelvic exams via prenatal and maybe contraceptions, but specifically abortion. That seems to be that defining difference on why they would want to call us limited. And I mean, I also kind of I'm bothered by that statement because the things that we do for our community, I would never use the word that we're limited in what we can do. I feel like there's a lot of things that we do, and we're very proud of those things. So that word limited is limiting, to what we're really doing out there.
And thank you for that. And it sounds as though you do some unique and interesting things. One of those would be going into the communities that don't have health care via your van. Is that something that Planned Parenthood does as well?
Well, interestingly, I don't believe they do it in Connecticut, but I think they have done that in other parts of the states, although I don't know how successful that was for them. But for us, we've had a lot of success being able to do that. We've been able to get into communities where people don't have easy access to public transportation or even their own transportation. So in areas like Hartford and New Haven and Waterbury and Manchester, these areas have really benefited from our presence there, and we're glad to do that.
Do the Planned Parenthood centers offer spiritual counseling and some of those others that, in particular, Representative Fiorella mentioned that they have here in Connecticut? Do they have those at Planned Parenthood?
Well, I don't know. I don't know if they do. I mean, I've heard this conversation brought up. It's definitely not something that they would specialize in. Mm-hmm. But I think that maybe some Planned Parenthoods would be equipped and able to kind of put you in contact with someone, maybe, but I don't know. But, again, our missions are different. They're not the same things. So I'm not one to compare myself or keep track of what Planned Parenthood's doing. I'm focusing on what Caring Families is doing through the Women's Center of Eastern Connecticut, mobile care, and providing the resources and support that our clients and our community are asking and needing.
So, you've mentioned some limitations that perhaps both organizations have. So would you say it would be fair to say that the Limited Services Pregnancy Center name for your organization is unfairly proposed in terms of comparison?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that. And again, also knowing where that term originated from through NARAL, I would very much be against that.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I would appreciate an opportunity to come back and speak to Jeremy some more. I am new to this committee. I did review much of his testimony, and I am trying to get to the bottom of some of the questions I have. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I apologize. I was not part of this committee prior to, and I'm just trying to get the best understanding I can and take the opportunity to ask Jeremy questions that I had wanted answers to. So thank you, Jeremy. As far as Section 3 goes, because we were going through the bill, do you have any concerns about the remediation that is being suggested?
Yeah, and I think that this is the area where the Attorney General could really end up compelling speech of the pregnancy centers. So one of the differences between what we saw in the City of Hartford's ordinance and this bill, SB 835, is the City of Hartford also had a second part to it that would require pregnancy centers to post the sign that they don't provide medical services. And this was a very wonky part of the ordinance because it wasn't clear that if you had to put like the essence of putting out to lunch sign, so every time your doctor left the premise, did you have to say you don't have a doctor on site? And so we really worked through that. But because of that part of the ordinance, we've heard this raised. I believe this wasn't part of last year's ordinance as well. So part of that discussion is, well, we're not looking to tell pregnancy centers what to say. But when we start looking at that remediation part of this, it could absolutely be part of the Attorney General's determination to say to a pregnancy center that they have to say this or they have to say that as in response. There's also a financial component to the fines that would be very difficult for pregnancy centers. I mean, again, I can't imagine that we live in a world where the Attorney General never mistakenly does something. We see this all the time, and nobody's perfect. Sometimes things aren't what they seem. Sometimes new information comes to light, and sometimes people are just wrong. And so, and I'm thankful for the court systems and legal systems here to protect us. But in this case, I mean, the pregnancy centers could really be finding themselves in regular fights and, trying to protect the speech of what they say. Again, one of the things that have come up many times in this committee was whether a pregnancy center would lead on the first sentence of their website or their material, "We don't provide abortions." And this is just really contrary to what all businesses and organizations do. This would be like Planned Parenthood saying we don't provide Bible studies or things like that. I mean, organizations don't lead with the things that they don't do. And again, the people and the folks that are behind this, that are looking to target pregnancy centers, have an ideological difference in opinion about abortion, and that's a concern of ours. So as we say, it's not being infringing on our First Amendment. It's not infringing on freedom of religion, and it's so narrowly tailored. But I think it's too narrowly tailored, if that makes sense, because it really shows the cards, and it shows the cards that if you're not providing abortion in the state of Connecticut, you're going to be under a different set of laws than everyone else.
Well, and you make a good point, and thank you for that you would go into a business, they wouldn't tell you what they don't sell. They would promote what they do sell. And so I thank you for that answer. You had mentioned that this is the fourth or fifth year of you opposing similar legislation. What kinds of conversations have transpired before about deceptive advertising?
Well, I mean, I think the most troubling part is, again, that no pregnancy center has really been consulted in the time leading up to these bills, and we've asked to be. I brought this up either a year or two ago, and I think I was politely told that this is your time. This is your 3 minutes is your time to bring this up. But there's a lot to really hash through. There's a lot to learn and discover about what's happening here. Every pregnancy center is different, but a lot of us are the same. So I think that one of the things that we've seen that happen after all these years is that we're not being included in that. Also, again, I mean, if we could reference my testimony from last year for SB 144, I kind of have a list of things that have kind of transpired here that I think are kind of important to touch on. One of the things is, too, that we heard the city of Hartford, and I mentioned this already, Mayor Bronin and Councilwoman Bermuda testified that there were dozens of women who were subjected to deceptive practices in Hartford. There's none of that, again, has been proven or been able to be documented. We heard that, again, Attorney General Tong was unable to verify any complaints a couple years ago when he first came in. Another thing, too, is Representative Gilchrist testified in regards to this NARAL report that I would consider to be inaccurate and just littered with mistakes and misleading information. So she testified about this report where she was the previous executive director for NARAL, and she said that she was unable to even confirm if any of the instances in the report took place here in Connecticut. So she wasn't sure what happened here in Connecticut, what didn't happen here in Connecticut. And so there was just a lot of just things there that we weren't able to verify. We also saw that supporters of the bill suggested that the reasons why no complaints were ever made were because women were scared and vulnerable. But that's not something that has been our experience in pregnancy centers. We see very, very brave, very empowered women who are able to take care of business with their families. So I think there's a more feasible option why we haven't heard any complaints, and that's because there aren't any complaints. Also in that testimony, it's important, I also kind of put down some of the things that we've discussed as being deceptive advertising. And again, these are the things that are being spoken about in reference to the ordinance, the bill, but also being spoken by testimony. So some of the things that we talked about is the actual location. So where a building is located in proximity to another family clinic would be considered deceptive. Also their names, and even the communities they're in. We're hearing that pregnancy centers are in the wrong communities. They're by schools, or they're by medical offices, or they're in low-income neighborhoods. So all these things have been suggested to be deceptive. Even the organization names, and what colors and fonts they use have been considered to be deceptive, which is really interesting because this idea of the Hartford, and I know you're new to this committee, but the Hartford Women's Center in Hartford is a pregnancy center that's been accused of copying the signage and the font size and coloring of the Hartford GYN, and that's deceptive. However, if you take a look at that whole complex, everybody in that complex has the same color sign with the same size fonts in the same color. So obviously it's a conformity issue that's happening in that complex that's part of whatever that lease agreement is. But again, these are the kinds of things that people are saying are these, deceptive things that are happening. And, this one really surprised me was the kinds of clothes that people would wear on whether they were being deceptive, and we talked so much about white lab coats, and we even started hearing about that a little bit already. It's this idea of a person in a white lab coat if they're not a doctor. And this is the part that really gets me. The doctors that I know, when I'm interacting with them, they don't wear white lab coats. They're in a tie or a sweater. But for the reason you wear a white lab coat is to keep things off of you, right? That's the purpose of these white lab coats. That's why you see people who are butchers wear a white lab coat, or even a pharmacist. It's whatever the chemicals or products they're using that coat to protect them from that. And so to insinuate that a person in a pregnancy center, because they have scrubs on, again, I've seen a lot of receptionists in medical places wear scrubs. So just to have scrubs on or a white coat to be an indication of deception really, really gets me. And this is the irony of it is I've seen UConn medical students come in over the last couple of years to testify in favor of this bill in white lab coats at like 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And so again, if lab coats are really the indication that, to protect your garment from your undergarments from whatever, why are they coming out in public for it? So it's just really wonky watching this back and forth about, what people can wear for clothes and stuff. And this ordinance is even talking uniforms. So a shirt that has a logo or embroidered logo now is an indication that you're a pregnancy center. That makes no sense at all because that same thing's true for my mechanic that changes the oil in my car. And it's just really a really strange way of kind of, trying to determine what a pregnancy center should or shouldn't look like. And I would probably also say that, I think one of my last points was the words in which the organization uses or doesn't use. Representative Gilchrist suggested pregnancy centers co-opt the language of reproductive justice. And so now what was being suggested by even a representative that's on this committee when she testified last year is there's certain words that we're allowed to use and not use. And we're not saying we provide abortion. That's not what's being being called up. Words like empowerment are even being called into it. And that's a place where the government has no business in being, is trying to, tell you which words and which sequence of words you can do that. Again, I support this idea of all organizations being able to say what they do and stand by that, but there are mechanisms already in place that could regulate and protect both the organization if there were false claims made, and also protect the client if some harm were to come from them.
What did you mean when you were speaking about elected officials not providing proof? I was not part of the past testimony, so I don't know exactly what you're referring to.
Yeah, so I kind of already touched base on that. We heard some folks like Mayor Luke Bronin, Councilwoman Bermuda, Representative was it Gilchrist, I believe I mentioned. and Leanham, they were supposed to provide some of this clarifying information, and that stuff has not been provided over it. And it's really hard because this committee seems to be the only time anybody wants to talk about this issue. So when this committee's over, it's over, and nobody follows up on these concerns and these open-ended things. Even last year, Representative Michelle had told me when I testified that he had in hand proof of deceptive advertising from a pregnancy center. I asked for it, and he couldn't find it, and he was looking for it, and he promised that he would email it to me, and I haven't seen that. And, I'm not saying that deception can't happen, but my biggest concern is the things that people are saying are deceptive aren't deceptive. And I think that this is the issue at hand, that sometimes people just don't like or agree with the message you're saying, and that's not the same thing as being deceptive or misleading. That's just having a different opinion.
Well, I thank you very much for the answers to the questions that I had. I would have liked the opportunity to hear more about the lawsuit in Hartford. Perhaps maybe another legislator will ask you to elaborate a little bit on that, but thank you, Jeremy.